Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to kick off this week's new theme of supergroups with some ELP, Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. I've been told that for this band that they were one of the first bands in the Prague area of music that were writing symphonic levels of writing or composition styles. Still not entirely sure what I'm getting in store for here today, but I did say that I need to have a mindset of listening to a classical piece with multiple movements, even though this isn't a classical style song. So I think primarily just requesting me to be in the right mindset for the structure of this track. And it's a long song. I do like the 1, 2, 3, 4 going on there. Something in my brain's like, oh, that's a really nice number. 1234. Let's dive into it. What album? Oh, this comes off of their self-titled Emerson, Lake, and Palmer album from 1970. Let's dive into this and see what's up with Take a Pebble. It's a very interesting start.
Just take a pebble and cast it to the sea. Then watch the ripples that unfold into me. My face spills so gently into your eyes, disturbing the waters of our lives.
It's a very dynamic song. I like this melodic percussion work we have here. We saw in the beginning too.
Shreds of our memories are lying
The piano
on
ideas
your
are
grass.
definitely inspired.
Wounded words of laughter are graveyards of the past. Photographs are gray and torn, scattered in your fields. Letters of your memories are not real.
Oh, yeah, just a very cool painting with all of these three instruments coming together. What is the percussion though? It's very tight, but it's quiet. It still sounds like a snare, but it sounds like steel brushes, but it has more rebound than steel brushes wouldn't have, like a singular, really mallets, maybe fuzzy mallets on a snare drum. I don't know. I think that'd create too much body. I'm very, very interested if anyone has has an answer for what the percussionist was doing there. The dripping water? Off on the right? That's an interesting little detail. Maybe it's not dripping water. It kind of sounds like an animal in water. Small fish, lizard, maybe. I kind of like the idea. Yeah, like there's an audience clapping along because it's a good little rhythm, and then the rhythmic clapping turn into applause. Oh, I love the way it resonates from one side to the other. Those really big chords. Yeah. So the guitar got to show off a little bit. Now the piano gets to show off, but it's cool. The piano introduced this by taking some ideas from the first section. Ooh, oh, spicy. It is interesting if these pitches are panned differently, that it's opposite. The low notes are to the right, the higher notes are to the left. I mean, that's how it would be if you were facing the pianist, but not if you were the pianist, which makes it feel backwards to me. I also don't think we've ever heard anything like that. We see that in drums, positioning of the different parts of the kit, but piano? A mirroring of the traditional placement? Yeah. I do like the raw drum kit sounds. It sounds very much like I'm in the room with the kit rather than it having that pristine production feeling to it. At least for this specific music, I think it works really well. This pianist, dude, the drummer doesn't have much in the way of pitches to make melodies. The bassist seems to just always be within the current chord. The pianist is just, he's like, throw a spice there, throw a spice there. The beauty of something so simple.
With sadness on your shoulders, like a worn out
I'm curious what the lyrics are going to be about.
in pockets creased and tattered, hang the rags of your hopes. The daybreak
That does sound like a timpani, though. We've heard quite a few percussion instruments here too, so our percussionist isn't just a drum kit player. Oh, I figured we were gonna go up. Yeah, going for... Okay. So they went the opposite of what I was expecting. Both would have worked well. Going for some bombastic element, doing it that third time, and then taking it up a third or a fifth to really drive home a final intensity, versus what they did do, which is bring everything down volume and intensity and layers and make it a bit more comfortable, quiet, chill. Yeah, so I was saying, yeah, I wonder what the lyrics are going to be for this. What is this about? Because there's not a lot of lyrics for the runtime. We have a very extended instrumental part throughout this. But I did pick up a typical structure to this, which I found to be interesting. We have a verse chorus idea. If you listen particularly to the vocals, at least, there is two styles. There's the mono, or its center channel is probably coming through both in equal direction. And then we have the one where it feels split, hard pressed, 100% on either of the channels. And we go back and forth on this twice, I think. Pretty sure it was only twice. Then that took us to the 7 or 8 minute instrumental bit, and then of course we ended on the same idea with the center channel that eventually goes to the panned vocals. So we have a verse chorus, bridge, and then a return back to the verse and chorus. Now, I don't know if we can technically call the looped part, a verse, and a chorus. Musically, I feel like it's very homogeneous. So maybe this is more of an AABA, which is a condensed form of the modern verse, chorus structure, and is what's in line with jazz. Two takes of your I was going to say scripted, your pre-written composed section, then the solo section in the middle, which can be as long as the soloists want to play for, and then a return to the hook, the pre-composed part. That's not to say that I think this is a jazzy song in really any manner, but it does follow along with that general stereotypical structure for modern music. And I find that to be really interesting. Now, of course, when we get into the fact that we have an intro to this that's very different from anything else, it also acts as a retransition, or no, a transition out of our first chorus back into the center channel vocal stuff. And the fact that the bridge is like 3 or 4 sections long, yeah, once we get into the nitty gritty, it's a bit different of a structure, but I think it still kind of fits within that general idea, which is not what I was expecting as we got into it. I found that to be rather interesting, but it is pretty cool. I like it when songs can do cool things within tried and true ideas. Going with a cookie cutter component or a traditional idea or something like that. Cookie cutter always feels a bit dismissive to me. Oh, it's just cookie cutter. It feels bad, right? But it's just another word for iterative. Blueprint also sounds better, even though it's like basically the same thing as cookie cutter. It's wild how words can be synonyms but have different connotations tied to them. Anyways, I guess getting onto a words thing, I'll save that for a live stream in the future. Stick to music here. I love it when bands can take something that's iterative and tweak it just enough to make it really interesting without completely losing that style, that idea, the component that is a bit more uh, traditional or commonly used. We'll use that phrase. And that's exactly what they do here. Now, musically, I gotta split this up into a few ideas because they have a few ideas here that are very different in execution. The first being the intro. I'm not quite sure what to make of that yet. It's a fun introduction. I love the interplay between all the instruments. There's a cool rhythmic thing going on. Well, I don't think it was the intro. I think it was the second time we heard the intro, which was after the first chorus. When, oh no, was it after the second chorus? See, the thing is that the drums play melodically in these areas. The intro, after the first chorus, after the second chorus. We don't really hear this idea again. It's revisited a little bit in the bridge, but not with anywhere near as much focus. The drummer plays melodically alongside the bass, doing some lead melodies, and then the piano doing whatever it's doing. I kind of want to put it in the realm of flourish, but it's also very flashy. It's ornamentation that I feel is supposed to uh, take your attention away from the lead melody more so than embellish on what the lead melody is. It's a it's a decision. It's a choice. We'll get to that in a little bit. But yeah, it's a lot of it is bass and drum here, and it's really cool because there's rhythmic interplay between them, but there's also this melodic component where the drummer isn't playing a pattern, not playing a beat. They're hitting whatever part feels like it would be natural next in a melodic composition based on pitch or timbre or I don't know, any element that would have contrast. It isn't about finding this rhythmic pattern to act as a metronome as much as it's, hey, I have my toms tuned to F and A and my snare is pretty close to a C and you know the cymbals are higher pitched, so if I want to go higher than these instruments, I'll throw some cymbal work in there. And rhythmically. It's not about finding a pattern or a syncopation or anything like that. It's what feels natural melodically. And yeah, I found this whole concept really interesting, but also quite lovely. I love melodic drum work. So it immediately had me intrigued, and the fact that it was sort of in some ways counterpoint between the drums and bass was very cool. Also, though, there's the piano, and I'm not, like I said, it's the piano is doing flourish here. It's doing embellishment. It's doing ornamentation. It's supposed to be an extra component to what our two leads are doing, but it's so flourishy to the point of flashiness, the speed and the runs, the length of some of the runs. We'll get like 4 notes, 6 notes, and space between them. That feels like flourish. That feels like ornamentation. A little idea here, a bar or two later, a little idea there. Something to spruce up the core sound. And then out of nowhere, the pianist would be like, actually, you know what? I'm in the spotlight now. And they'll do like 20 or 30 notes real quick run, and you can't help but listen to that. It dominates the sound. It is an interesting idea, I think, to allow the ornamental parts to take over the sound and hijack the listener's ears as much as the piano does in occasions in those moments on this track. Now, of course, what I think is really cool is that there is a nice flow to this, and that I feel like the intensity of the pianist increases over time. 4 notes, then 6 notes. 6 notes again, maybe sneaking up to 10. Now we're putting in 20, and it's this gradual rise into dominating the spotlight. But it all sort of leans into the next idea, almost as foreshadowing into the next section, which would be piano led. And so there is this smoothness of transition between ideas because of that. And maybe that's, yeah, actually, that makes a lot of sense. It's probably why they did it. It's a little disruptive to listening to the bassist, but it absolutely works in the larger structure of ideas. So yeah, that's pretty cool. This, of course, takes us into the verse and the chorus. Everybody's in on these. We have cool bass lines. The drums become a bit more rhythmic, but don't completely give up their melodic components. The piano is constantly laying down some moving ideas. And then we have the vocals on top of all of this. There's a subtle shift between the mono or center channel vocals versus the the panned channels vocals. Musically, like I said, there's a subtle shift here. It's kind of hard for me to differentiate them into a distinct verse and chorus because musically they're very similar, but to me, I hear this division in the vocals and it makes me want to split those sections up. For all I know, it's just, as I mentioned earlier, verse, verse, extended bridge, verse, giving us that AABA structure I'd mentioned earlier. But yeah, I actually find this section to be the least interesting and the most standard. Even harmonically, things are closer to rock here. It's the part of the song I think that is supposed to grab your typical listener if they made it through the very interesting intro, which had some wild percussion sounds. And it was very atmospheric more so than traditionally written music. But if you get past that, you're rewarded with some very traditional music. If you get past that, though, you find the Tootsie Roll center of the Tootsie Pop. That's a weird metaphor. Let's just progress forward. We get to the B section, or the bridge, or the C section if you're using the ABABCB structure. It's solos. It's like 7 minutes of solos. I don't really know how to feel about it yet. Almost everybody gets a chance to shine. I don't remember what came first. I don't think it was the piano, because I remember saying, oh, this is the piano's time to shine now. But I don't remember if it was bass. Oh, it was guitar. The guitar kicks us off. From there we get piano, and then we get a little bit of bass and drums, and things start to layer up here. But before that, we have isolated guitar. left channel by itself, if I remember correctly. The piano was interesting because it was mostly left channel too, as far as the higher range stuff, and as they went down to the lower range stuff, it went to the right, which I had mentioned feels kind of awkward to me in production. That's how the keys would be lined up. If you're an audience member watching the keyboardist, it would be mirrored, but I tend to produce music as if I'm the one playing it. And this conversation actually comes up in the drum world a lot. Are your is your snare and hi-hat supposed to be left panned and you go across for your toms to your right, which would be how the drummer perceives it, or the inverse of that, which is how the audience would perceive the kit and where sound would come out from them. Both are fine, both have their pros and cons. I tend to be a person who prefers my drums produced as if I'm the drummer, with snare and hi-hat on the left and toms on the right. But I'd never heard any piano being produced with the mirroring effect before, and it's disorienting for me. At least with the drum thing, I can kind of come around to it. It's a little different, but it's not like I haven't heard it before, and it just takes me some time to get acclimated to it. But piano? At first, I thought it was like, oh, the piano is just left pan. That's fine. The guitar was too. We're definitely favoring one side here. Just, an auditory hurdle to get over, which happens a lot with these older songs, being that panning was kind of a new thing. I don't know when exactly auditory panning was available, but 1970s was definitely an era, well, the 60s was definitely an era where they started to experiment with it. So there's probably still some experimentation going on what to do. We have two channels now. Everything's not mono. How do we go about doing this? What's some cool things we can do with it? So it's one of those, older bits of experimentation that a newer audience, which I'm included in that, might have a little bit of a hurdle to get over. But I was like, okay, maybe it's just pan left. And then it wasn't. It's just as we went down the keyboard, we went over to the right, and it felt so weird. But anyways, this whole section is just solos. Trading off solos. Very minimalistic. One instrument at a time for most of it. I really wanted to be taken on a journey with this. I wanted to engage with it in some way, and it just never quite clicked with me. Particularly the guitar one, I enjoyed the contrast of it, which dynamics is something we'll have to talk about in a second, but we did bring the volume quite a bit down. We removed basically all the layers, we just have the one instrument. I like that from a compositional and artistic perspective. But I did find it a little bit harder to engage with the guitar, I think primarily because it was just too quiet. It probably could have come up by an extra 25-30% and it would have worked just as well, being a massive volume reduction without being reduced down as far as it was. I tend to have all my audio normalized against -15 decibels, and this was running about -50 to -45, which is a huge gap. It certainly is effective at creating contrast, but was it good for the song? I don't know. This is also a remaster, so it might not have been as aggressive in the original. I don't know. I can't comment on that. But I did find that it was difficult for me to concentrate on it. My mind wanted to think about anything else. I do know my mind drifted a couple of times. I was like, no, 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 dude, we're listening to music. Get back to this. But the melodies were nice. The ideas were nice. I enjoyed them. I just wish they had a little bit more presence while still retaining the massive contrast shift. It was also really interesting to hear this contrast against the piano, which came in next. The piano brings up the volume a little bit and increases the intensity. The pianist loves to do these really large runs, and they're quicker. They're definitely ear catching in a way that I don't think the guitar necessarily was. The guitar solo is very tasteful, very emotive, whereas the pianist to me felt like showing off for a vast majority of it. That's not to say it was completely devoid of soul, to use a phrase, but the guitar definitely felt more soulful. I don't really have a good way to describe what a tasteful solo is, but I've heard people say that faster, more technical solos and sort of more technical music in general, they lack the soul of music. I don't know if I agree with it, but it's tossed around enough that I'm hoping people can sort of understand where I'm coming from when I say that phrase, as it does get used often. So, in place of me finding a better phrase eventually, that's what I'm sticking with at the moment. Um, but there was something really cool here too, is that we didn't just have volume contrast or speed contrast, but we also had harmony contrast. The pianist brings in, and has been using this whole time, I suppose this is where I can bring in the harmony thing, very cool note intervals. For the most part, the bassist and the guitar is just very much safe notes, well within the constraints of the chord or key that they're in at any time. Always playing something that is consonant to the harmony, something that sounds good with the notes around them. The piano, even from the start, is just like, you know what? I like spicy notes, and they'll bring in these jazzy ideas. They'll bring in these, this classical style of dissonance, things that aren't hard to listen to, but definitely bring in clashing intervals, and create these little extra bits of spice. And much like in jazz and occasionally in classical, they are played and moved away from rather quickly, so you get a taste of that spice without any lingering, lingering taste of overexposure to a specific flavor. It's very tasteful uses of spiciness, and the pianist just throws it all over the place, and that's rather consistent through the entire song. There is a safety to the harmonic writing here for everyone except the pianist, and he's just like, he tosses in the spice everywhere. There's always some interesting harmony coming from him, and I like that. Wait, I do like that. Okay, so that might have sounded weird. Like, wait, is he lying to me? But no, I've talked about this before. Tasteful spice. Jazz musicians do it a lot, especially in solos. I love that more so than bands who just focus on dissonance, which is not my favorite kind of rough intervals. But what I like about this is something I don't get to talk about too much in bands, which is personality. Instrumental personality might be a way to go about doing that. We talk about roles, right? Foundation, harmony, rhythm, melody, atmosphere, right? Those are the four roles. I know I said five there, but foundation and harmony are pretty much the same thing. I don't know why I said both. And we talk about how, the bass is doing chord shapes or something, for instance. And I'm like, oh, they're the harmony, they're the foundation of everything. The drums are being a human metronome, there's our rhythm, and the flute is doing, a lead melody. All right, and then we have some atmospheric stuff from the strings. Maybe they're pushed to the outside, maybe they're ornamental ideas, compositional roles. This is interesting though, because it kind of takes that idea and pushes it not to this instrument is doing this specific compositional idea at the moment, to this instrument typically carries this personality. The drums are very experimental. A lot of the time they aren't sitting within the realm of metronome. They are doing things that drummers don't typically do. It's a very experimental decision. Not only that, but they utilize instruments that I could not always get a read on. And they have instruments that I could get a read on that are not traditionally utilized in music like this. For instance, there's timpani in here, which I thought was very cool. The bassist is very traditional. Almost everything the bassist does is either bass melody that would not be completely out of place in bass work for prog rock bands in general, while also utilizing some jazz fusion ideas of walking bass lines and, well, more specifically than walking bass lines is chord shaping. A lot of this stuff is very traditional, and so the bassist is not only just the glue because they have the simpler parts, but the glue because they're the most traditional writing. The pianist, to me, feels very seasoned. They're not purely experimental, but they're not purely traditional either. They walk in both worlds and know when one side is going to be more effective than the other to play at any moment. And so from that perspective, it's sort of like passing out the roles, right? But it's more of a characteristic thing. And I can say right after, I don't know how accurate this is for all of their output, even all of their output for this specific era, this specific album, but at least for this specific song, all three members are in a specific role as far as complexity, I suppose, or maybe iterative versus experimental. It's not even like, it's not even a spectrum of it. The pianist is in the middle, the drummer is very experimental, the bassist is very traditional. And it's just very cool to see that. Usually, especially with the progressive music that we listen to post 2000s, everyone's sort of on the same page. You either have a band that is very experimental and flourishy at all levels, or you have a band that's very rhythmically experimental, something like Meshuggah. Everybody's just doing that same type of experimentation. Examples like this where, the whole band's on the same page, but then you get something like this. I'm like, everybody brings a little their own special flair to the table. And that's just very cool. I've never brought that up before, and for a moment, I didn't. It clicked right as I said I like this, and I was like, "Oh no, no, no! I like this. No, because this is cool." Uh, Maybe I seem a bit weird for being so engaged on this topic that maybe most people don't care about that much, but I just think it's very, very cool that I can feel who these people are through what they're bringing to the table. Now, I had mentioned that I wanted to connect with it a little bit more. I felt that the verse chorus idea was fine. I also said that I feel like it appeals more to a traditional music listener. That's not to say it's completely traditional in its sound, but a lot more so than the bridge area and the intro. It's just the most palatable part of the song. But the more that I listen to the bridge and trying to connect it to, I mean, particularly even the guitar work, the guitar solo, which, as I mentioned, quite a bit quiet and not quite as harmonically interesting as the piano would be. Just kind of almost becoming background music. Like I said, my mind tried to drift a couple of times and I had to grab that wheel and steer it right back. I never quite connected all of this together. It's very separate to me. The intro and its sound, its interesting everything to it. The more traditional verse chorus sections, the bridge, the water dripping during the guitar solo, the way that it escalates into a return to the verse and chorus again, and then the outro, which I thought was fantastic. It's one of the few things that makes sense to me. It goes in line so much with the chorus itself. I have a real tough time piecing it all together, and even in the more cohesive parts, like the back-to-back solo sections, it still doesn't really mean much to me. I enjoyed a lot of this on a technical, theoretical level. I enjoyed it as a musician myself, as somebody who writes music. I appreciated it on harmonic ideas. I appreciated it on performance elements, injecting your own personality into it. I appreciate it on a lot of more technical elements, but as a song, as an auditory experience, didn't really click with me. I don't think that has so much to do with the song, but is entirely the song's fault. Yeah, that's contradictory. Let me clarify that. I think the song is written fine. The problem is that, like a good movie, especially something in the mind screw genre, it really shines on repeat watches, or in this case, repeat listens. I don't want to say that it's particularly dense as a song. I pretty much understand every section in isolation. It's sort of dense lengthwise. Not something I really talk about too often. I feel like, though, becoming more familiar with it is going to open up some details I missed that are going to help connect it all together. This is just one of those songs that it's difficult to grab everything on a first time, and it's easier to grab the surface level things, which are the more technical components to it. So that's where I sit with it. I don't really have any complaints about the song. I have no criticisms for it. Um, and part of that too is also because I'm just not quite familiar enough with it. I'm sure that I give it 5 listens, things will begin to click in place for better or worse. Some things will stand out and they'll make more sense, and other things I will be a bit more upset about, and those would be my criticisms. Even some of my favorite songs I've listened to hundreds of times and will continue to listen to 100 more times are still not perfect. I still have criticisms about them, still things I wish would have been done a different way or something. There's no such thing as perfect art being made by faulted creatures. What does that even mean? Made by humans who aren't perfect. So I don't want anyone to take that as, this guy's looking for things to get mad at. No, just nothing's perfect. Um, but yeah, I think normally here I'd say, oh, this is the story I got out of it. These are the emotions. This is how, you know, my experience with it. My experience is purely on a technical, critical level for this one. I don't really have an emotional engagement with it. And that's just something that would click under a subsequent listen. So let's dive into the few lyrics I think that this song had. I'd be surprised if there was more than 4 stanzas. I'm pretty sure that the final verse and chorus sounded similar to one of the first ones. I probably just repeated stanzas. But yeah, let's dive into that and see what's going on with Take a Pebble. Well, this kind of explained things, put some stuff into perspective. Even kind of put some of the instrumental stuff into perspective. Particularly the ending and maybe even the guitar solo. The dripping water now makes a little bit more perspective as well. It's, I don't know if you really call it a breakup song, but it's definitely a song reflecting on a past relationship. It talks about, well, it uses this metaphor often of throwing a pebble into a sea and watching the ripples. Now imagine multiple pebbles casting multiple ripples and all of them clashing and disturbing the water. That's what that's what goes on here. It talks about at the beginning, my face spills so gently into your eyes, disturbing the waters of our lives. Talking about how all of it sort of molds together, right? In a positive way, like losing yourself in someone's eyes, right? It completely changes your world, disturbing the waters of our lives. When you came into my world, things changed drastically, for the better, at least for the beginning. Um, I really like that idea because it talks about it in a semi-destructive way. Normally when you say something is disturbed or disturbing the waters, you're talking about negativity. You don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to disturb the water, right? But this, I mean, that's a very accurate description of adding a new relationship to your life. it changes things. It disturbs the waters. Where things were still and calm and predictable, you now have change. Change is very disturbing in that perspective. Verse 2 talks about some negativity. It says, shreds of our memories are lying on your grass. Wounded words of laughter are graveyards of the past. Photographs are gray and torn, scattered in your fields. Letters of your memories are not real. A lot of this is things of old, remembering laughter, memories, photographs, letters, paraphernalia of past events, both mentally, making memories, but also physical evidence of the past, the photographs, letters. It's evidence that all of this happened and it's not taken care of. The photographs are gray and torn, scattered into the fields. The memories have been shredded, right? It's about a destruction of the past. Whatever. I think this is very cool too, because it talks about a negative component to something that might have been positive. Even the good times are gray now because of what happened later. Verse 3, which comes in after the solo sections, says, wear sadness on your shoulders like a worn out overcoat. In pockets creased and tattered hang the rags of your hopes. The daybreak is your midnight. The colors have all died, disturbing the waters of our lives. So the aftermath of all this negativity, is that, our clothes are creased and tattered. We don't have color in our lives anymore. Daybreak is no different from midnight. Everything just kind of sucks. And this happened because our waters were disturbed. When the relationship was formed, the waters were also disturbed when the relationship ended. I really like that parallelism there. That's the whole song right there. It's thinking back on a friendship, romantic relationship, any sort of grouping up of two peoples. Remembering some of the good times, vaguely focusing really on the bad times, and how both have been disruptive. One a bit more of a positive disruption, though disruption's rarely used in that manner, it's true, and one a bit more of a negative, drawing that parallel between the two. Yeah, very cool. And tying this back to the music, I'm still not 100% sure about it. However, the ending, what I thought was going to go up into a bombastic section as he repeats of our lives, of our lives, of our lives, and then brings it down and the song sort of peters out, is because this is negative. It's not supposed to be bombastic. It's not supposed to be larger than life. It's about the sad end of a relationship. Maybe the sadness could have been avoided. We don't know. There's not enough information here. But regardless of what could have or should have happened, what did happen is that these two people went through it and ultimately hurt each other by the end of it. And even as my voice comes down on that, the song reflects a very similar idea. It's tragic, as the end of any relationship is. So the end of the song is tragic. I'm not entirely sure how to pair this to the bridge and all of its sections, but I do think it's interesting that it starts out with a lone guitar and dripping water. Maybe it's supposed to be about a low point for this person. Maybe it's supposed to focus on the negativity, as it just comes after verse 2, which was about the shredded memories and the torn up photographs. But maybe it's also supposed to be its own little story, starting out by yourself, the relationship then building off of that, growing into something else entirely, and then moving into the end of it, which is our final verse, bringing the sorrow back. I'm not entirely sure. I'd need a second listen, knowing what the lyrical themes are and seeing if I can't get any more story from the music, even from an outside perspective, but definitely within that perspective. as was very often in prog music of the era, primarily of the 60s, but I'm sure 1970 would also be borrowing heavily from some of the sounds from the 60s. A lot of the music was there to augment the lyrics. This is very clear in stuff like Genesis, where musically on its own, it wasn't always something that made a lot of sense. I've had my own frustrations with Genesis in the past, but when you take the music in account for what's happening in the story of what's going on or by the lyrics, things make sense in the moment, sort of like a soundtrack to a book reading in a sense, but the book reading is sung and it's very poetic. I don't know, the metaphor kind of loses steam a little bit, but the music always makes sense with the lyrics, and I wager that the same is true here. And viewing the music from the perspective of the end of a relationship and looking back on things might put a lot of perspective on some of the musical choices in here. Those are my thoughts. 51 minutes. Geez, that's a video. Those are my thoughts on ELP, Emerson, Lake, and Palmer's Take a Pebble. Let me know what your thoughts on this are. If you have anything you'd like to add on to what I said, correct me on your own perspectives or opinions on it, toss all that stuff down in the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree, which takes you to this menu. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell, I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, that wraps it up for this one. We do have a special selection coming up, I guess technically next. If you watched this all the way through when it came out, the special selection's been available for 22 minutes already. Otherwise, though, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of supergroups. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.